it goes.
News Talk 1150 WNDP.
Good afternoon and welcome from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's College of Aviation Atrium. It's the Town Hall, number 44, part of the President's Speaker Series. And on behalf of President John Johnson, the president of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, welcome to another in our series of President's Speakers. We're joined by Helen Thomas, the Dean of the White House Press Corps, who is very good. And our good friend Craig Crawford, columnist for Congressional Quarterly's CQ Politics. They are co-authors of the book, Listen Up, Mr. President. I'm joined by Mike Scudero, who will be working the audience. We'll be taking questions from our audience that's assembled here today. What a great crowd. And we'll be taking telephone calls for our radio audience at 239-0033, AT&T star 1150. Let me first welcome both of you to our broadcast this afternoon. Thank you. I know that this has been part of a tour once again for the book. Thank you both for coming to visit with us today.
Great to be here. I like how people are able to use the books to block the sun. Another good use for Listen Up, Mr. President.
Yeah, Helen Thomas, we almost had a chance to meet a few years ago when you had written another in your series of books. How did you and Craig Crawford come to work together on this project?
Washington is a small southern city. We were in the same profession. We met, liked each other, found ourselves almost on the same wavelength.
And we have many quotes from presidents of the book, and that one just reminded me of John Kennedy's, one of our favorites, that Washington is a city of northern charm and southern efficiency.
You, in this book, everything you wanted to know about your president wanted to know and what to do, you get some really direct things. For both of you, has this been an opportunity to say what you always wanted to say, but you were maybe afraid to say it when you're sitting in the press row?
I'm always.
She's not shy.
Not at all. But, I mean, you go back to the Kennedy era and all of the presidents that you've covered, the obvious question that people asked me to ask you was, what president, from a press standpoint, impressed you the most? Helen Thomas.
John Kennedy, because I think that he knew the difference between war and peace. He had been in war. He also understood that we can never stand still, that there's a universe out there that we have to explore. He was the first to say we're going to land men on the moon. And it was really kind of shocking. We thought that he was reading science fiction, but we did it. He set goals for young people and for mankind.
Craig,
and talk about Kennedy and going to the moon. One of the points Helen made that in our discussions about it and we put in the book is that in doing that, it wasn't just a fun thing to do to see the man on the moon. It was one of those transformational decisions that a president makes, because it put the country on the road to science. It got the country interested, got kids interested in science. And because of that decision and the nation's focus on science, it really led to what we are today, our dominance of the computer age. And that is the sort of transformational, visionary decision-making presidents do that we talk about in the book.
And the astronauts were invited, and their wives, to the first class of the astronauts from Cocoa Beach, and they were invited to the White House for an informal dinner with Kennedy. And he said to them during the mix and mingle, "Do you think we could land on the moon?" They said, "Sure, absolutely." You bet. When they left, they said, "Is this guy crazy?"
This is a great place to Embry-Riddle to be talking about that stuff, too, isn't it?
And you're part of the local college scene. You graduated from Stetson.
Stetson University, not far from here. Absolutely. Yes.
You spoke at Tiger Bay. We've seen each other before. And of course, you had that time where you worked for the Orlando Sentinel among your many trips through journalism and now blogging. Mm-hmm. Hey, what I wanted to ask you was, of bloggers, there are so many out there blogging. Isn't it difficult? Do you run to people and say it's difficult to know who are the serious bloggers and who are the people that just want to put a website out and just try to spark interest in a political issue.
Well, first let me cue up Helen for one of my favorite lines of hers about everybody with a laptop.
Thinks they're a journalist. And that's a problem because you don't really know. You can say anything, you can ruin lives, you can ruin reputations by just throwing it out there. And I think it's going to be such a tremendous thing for our society and yet very dangerous.
It just means more consumer beware. I mean, one of the things I always say is, when you're on a website and taking it for granted, do a little research, look at the about page, who are they really, who pays for it, get a little background before you just assume what you're reading on a blog or on a website is the actual truth.
Both of you having experience with the written word as well, about libel and about is it true first, the first rule of journalism, but that doesn't extend to the internet. Does it put writers who are still dealing with the printed page at any type of disadvantage, because bloggers don't have to be checked. They're not subject to fines and liabilities that the people in the print and television broadcast media are. Are we at a disadvantage?
I think it's an advantage to stick to the ethical line, and it's the only thing you can really have in democracy. You have an informed people, truly informed. That's what democracy is all about.
We had Bob Schieffer here 11 years ago, Mike? 11 years ago, he was here for a town hall. And one of our listeners from Port Orange asked about the liberal media. And Bob Schieffer, in his comments, I believe, said something along the lines of there is something known as selective listening, that the media is not liberal. But that moniker is still out there, that there's considered a lot of favorable press that's given, particularly by NBC, to this president. When you, as a veteran of almost 60 years, of covering this White House, covering the White House and different presidents, hear about the liberal media, what's your reaction, Helen Thomas?
I'm a liberal.
So you're happy with it?
You bet. Why would I be anything else? Liberals care about the poor, the sick, the jobless, and so forth. Republicans don't.
Craig Crawford, are you identified as a liberal conservative?
I hedge it a little more. I call myself a progressive redneck. But Helen was
Liberals care.
Helen was a straight news wire reporter for most of her career, and when switching to Hearst became a columnist. And I'm glad that happened because we got to see what she really thinks.
Not that I didn't say.
I've watched.
In my copy, I really had to play it down the middle. And in the end, you say if your mother says she loves you, you check it out. Because it was just the facts, ma'am. Because if people get the facts, they'll know the truth. And without being biased, I think that reporters all start out that way. Now I write my own opinion.
Did you ever have an editor lean on you and say, it's too much to the left, Helen?
No, never.
Craig, ever have an editor lean on you?
The editor was too.
Right. No, I mean, there's no question that most of the mainstream media for many years had a more liberal bent, but their owners did not, and so I think there were probably instances of that being reined in by the ownership of media, but I don't think it's as big a problem in our media as being wimps. I think it's wimpy media that makes me mad, not biased media.
We're going to take questions from the audience coming up in just a little bit for both Helen and Craig.
Social Security.
I'm sorry?
We never would have had Social Security, Medicare, or any of the great liberal moves. Unemployment insurance and so forth. This is liberal.
Were you surprised that Barack Obama skyrocketed the way he did, or did you know it was coming? For both of you. When he was running for president, did you think...
I covered the campaign, and no, I will not say I saw it coming. I really didn't think it was his experience, that it wasn't the race. I thought the country was ready for, on the racial front. But I really thought the experience question, having had a president in the previous 8 years who proved to have some issues, I think, with lack of experience at that level, and Obama actually had less. So I thought that would be a problem with a lot of more voters.
Helen Thomas?
What's the basis of the question?
The question, were you surprised at the skyrocketing fame that Barack Obama got to be elected president? Were you surprised that he skyrocketed like he did?
No, because I thought we were ready to be fair, racially and so forth. I'm just disappointed that I don't think he has enough courage. And he has to buck the right-wingers, the tea-baggers, and so forth, who don't want any progress. That's what's disappointing.
The book is called Listen Up, Mr. President, Everything You Always Wanted Your President to Know and Do. If you could grab President Obama by the collar, Helen Thomas, what would you say to him when you say, listen up, Mr. President?
I'd say, do the right thing. You'll never regret it. It doesn't matter whether you get another turn. It matters whether really you do the right thing for all the people, for Americans in the world.
And when it comes to places like, or issues like Afghanistan, Helen has some pretty direct advice.
Get out.
Get out of Afghanistan.
Stop the killing. Stop the killing. Stop the dying. Give us a reason, a real reason. Why are the people want us out? Because we occupy them. We have tortured them, and so forth. We have demeaned America. We don't need to be there unless they tell us the truth of why are we there. This business of, can we go into every dictatorship and kick the people out? Who are we?
Let's stay on this topic for a moment and ask you, and you probably address it in this book, Listen Up, Mr. President, the real truth about Iran. Will they hit Israel? Do you think they'll hit Israel? Iran is saying that Israel's prepared for a fight this summer.
I think the U.S. has promised to do something, certainly tight sanctions promised Israel, and Israel says it will bomb. Why? It has no right to do that. We have the bomb. We're the only country in the world who use the nuclear weapon. No American will ever say that Israel has the weapon, because if they say it, they can't keep telling everybody else you can't have it.
I give President Obama credit for trying. His inaugural address, he said, we extend an open hand if you'll unclench your fist, appealing to Iran, and apparently the fist has not been unclenched, and Obama's got to take a different approach. I don't know.
We're working on the third generation now of nuclear weapons. I mean, who are we to dictate to the rest of the world unless we do the right thing, which is a total disarmament of nuclear weapons, this total stand down.
Due respect, is that not sort of pious or novice thinking that you think people will just lay down their weapons? These are people who want to kill us. You really think they'll put their weapons down?
Why do they want to kill you?
Because we're the infidels. We have the evil way of life.
I don't believe that. I don't
Really?
believe it's religion. I believe it's their land, their country. They don't like to be occupied. Nobody does want to be. They were running themselves. They loved us before we started moving into their country. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. That goes back to Genghis Khan. I mean, why, you have to ask, why are these people suddenly who used to love us, really love us, wanted us to, after World War I and the mandates, League of Nations, the whole Middle East wanted the U.S. in there instead of any other country.
We're talking with Craig Crawford, Helen Thomas. They're the authors of the book, Listen Up, Mr. President. In this book, and I didn't know it until reading it, Calvin Coolidge hired the first speechwriter. Why? Was it that he knew he didn't have a big outgoing personality known as Silent Cal? Why did he do it?
You know, a lot of people, he was known as Silent Cal, and he was so passive in conversations with people that Dorothy Parker, the great writer, when told that he was dead, said, how did we know? But he was also, actually, a lot of people don't realize, a very good speaker. He was almost a charismatic speaker, which people didn't know, and he was very interested in his speeches and how they were written, and he took the lead in hiring speechwriters to help him write them.
And when he was asked why he went to church, what the preacher had talked about at the church, he said, sin.
There was another story of someone at a Washington party asked him, I've got a bet, Mr. President, that I can't get you to say 3 words. And he said, you lose.
There was also a story, William Howard Taft, notorious for being so fat that he broke his White House bathtub, shows how not to cultivate a strong public image. I think he was the first president who played golf, became a Supreme Court justice at one point later in life.
Yeah.
But Taft, as big as he was, I mean, a person that big might not be able to get the national stage today, but he didn't care back then. Comments?
Yeah, he was so one time he was out west riding, and he sent a telegram back to one of his cabinet members and said, "Had a great afternoon, rode a horse." And the cabinet member wrote back and said, "How's the horse?"
These are great stories, and they're all in this book. Then we're going to take questions from our audience, so start thinking about what you want to ask both of these people. We'll also take telephone calls at 239-0033, AT&T, star 1150. You can email questions to us, mark@markberniershow.com. mark@markberniershow.com. The website is powered by ZGraph. Of Ronald Reagan, and who acknowledged the Iran-Contra affair in a television address covering this, Helen Thomas, knowing you, for what little we know you now, personally getting to know you here, did you say, thank God, when he acknowledged Iran-Contra on television?
I always like the truth, because I think the truth is very hard to handle, but it's the best way to go. And presidents dissemble a lot. I mean, I guess I don't know why they can't tell you straight. I think the American people can handle the truth, and I think that's the first trust you kind of have to have.
And in that case, telling the truth on Reagan's part, people forget this, but it's true. At that time, maybe it wasn't going to go all the way, but there was a serious move toward impeachment over Iran-Contra in those days, and that speech, fessing up, basically, took all the momentum out of that. It's always made me wonder, had Bill Clinton not chosen early on to tell such a huge lie, if that would have thwarted the impeachment process.
Kennedy did the same thing with Bay of Pigs. And I'm trying to think of one other president who might have told the truth.
A lot of our lists.
Actually, there was another. It's an interesting comparison that we write about this one in the book. Is Grover Cleveland, who's famous for supposedly having the illegitimate child. Well, he was known as a very honest guy, and when that came out in his campaign, and his aides came to him, said, this is going to get out in the news. What do we do? And he simply said, "Tell the truth." He never denied it. The interesting background of that story is it appears that it actually wasn't true, even though he took credit, because when that child was born, he was a single lawyer in Buffalo, New York, and this woman he had had the affair with had many affairs with other lawyers in town who were married. And he was actually protecting his friends who were married and took credit for that. So even though he told the truth and accepted responsibility, it may not actually have been true.
Wasn't there another situation in which a president was accused of fathering a child, Warren G. Harding? I don't know whether he did or not, or whether that was rumor. Is that in the book as well?
Yeah, and that one was not actually very well confirmed. I mean, it was something that was used in campaigns, and they were able to deflect it pretty well.
It's Shakespearean. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. It always haunts you. It comes back to you.
I mean, what if John Edwards had handled it the way Grover Cleveland did?
Oh, jeepers. I mean, is his 15 minutes up finally, folks? I mean,
I think it's not what happened, but just how he handled it is just unbelievable. It's hard to fathom him making a comeback.
I remember watching President Clinton on that fateful Saturday after the impeachment vote fails to take him out. He goes to the Rose Garden. It's like, maybe we can put this behind us. And I thought Republicans had a chance from a Republican standpoint, and they blew it. They didn't, at least I thought, if you're going to go after the guy, go after him for something more than this. Not that lying isn't important, but it seemed flimsy at best. Was it that it was flimsy at best, or was it just that the people who could have voted to take him out just backed off and blew it?
They never backed off. He never knew 1 second in the White House during his whole 8 years when he wasn't being investigated and denigrated by the Republicans. The man's ability to survive all this was incredible.
You don't think he brought it on himself with his dalliances?
Everybody brings a lot on themselves, but they deliberately set traps for him.
But you think they set him up with Monica Lewinsky?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying exactly what you said, which is was superficial. That was not the key issue in terms of governing this country.
I was thinking about all the things they could have gone after him for, state secrets that found their way to China, that went through the Energy Department, which seemed to have all the security of a screen door with Bill Richardson there. I'm thinking, you want to go after him for something like that.
How about George Bush starting a war? No weapons of mass destruction. All lies. No weapons of mass destruction. No ties to Al-Qaeda. And no threat from a third world country against the world's major military power. How is that possible?
How is it that they didn't go after him then, if it was that sound? Why didn't they go after President Bush for lying about going
Because
into
you
the
can
war?
always use national security, and after 9/11, people were ready to accept anything.
And I think Democrats don't have the thirst for the jugular, and I think it hurts them sometime in politics. I think they probably did have the opportunity. And the problem, however, was so many of them actually voted for the Democrats voted for the invasion, so it was a little more difficult. But I do think had that situation been reversed, we might have seen an impeachment proceeding.
Let me bring you back to something a little more contemporary. Most of the people here, if not all of them, know Sarah Palin has been in town for the last couple of days. Is she the real deal? Is she a potential presidential candidate, or is she a manufactured product? What do you both think, covering the media?
I do think the Republicans are looking for her fame is what they're drawn to, and it is quite incredible. And there aren't any other stars in the Republican Party right now who achieve anything like that. I have to say, personally, I don't find her very interesting. And I mean, I don't dislike her or like her, or I just don't find her interesting. I don't understand why, for example, the media stays so focused on her. Certainly the first failed vice presidential candidate who stayed in the news this long. There have been sitting vice presidents who haven't stayed in the news this long.
Helen Thomas on Sarah Palin.
I think she has a right to run. It's very clear she's very ambitious, and I think somebody's lit a fire under her, and she does think she's a candidate. I think that she has yet to really qualify, but you never know. You can learn a lot out there, and she's been out there, and she's popular, so I think she's worrisome simply because of what she believes, which is so far to the right. She believes in all of the things that I don't believe in, which is I don't think it's a very kind approach to life.
Helen Thomas, Craig Crawford are with us here at this town hall as part of the President's Speaker Series at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Evan Bayh will leave politics, says he hates Congress. Were you surprised? Bayh, in a matchup against Dan Coates, could have beaten him, could have beaten at least one other Republican there, but they said that they were going to have to put a lot of money toward his reelection. Were you surprised, for both of you, that Evan Bayh leaves politics, the senator from Indiana?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of senators in the past Connie Mack from Florida, for example, who quit surprisingly. And he was very upfront, and a couple others I've talked to. It depends on the person, but for a lot of them, it's not a very fun job. I mean, they spend so much time fundraising, and particularly if they're not high in seniority, they don't have that much authority. They don't run anything. I mean, you don't have to do anything as a senator other than talk, unless you're in a senior position. So a lot of them just truly get weary of what they feel like is kind of the uselessness of what they're doing. In this case, though, this is a real hit on Democrats staying in control of the Senate, which is it's not likely that Democrats will lose the Senate, but it's no longer unimaginable. However, when you look at how the Republicans are able to control the Senate as a minority party, maybe the Democrats would be better off to lose control. It seems like the way the Senate rules work, you can control things better as a minority party.
Were you surprised at Evan Bayh, Helen?
Yes, and I say good riddance.
Really?
Why? Because he's a Democrat. He was a Republican masquerading as a Democrat.
Really?
He voted mostly with Republicans. He's ultra-conservative, and I don't believe, at least he didn't give us the usual answer, I want to be closer to my family. That's baloney. I think he must be offered a big CEO job or something. And when he was not taken as vice president candidate and so forth, I think that disappointed him. But he doesn't vote with the president on anything. He's a blue dog. Democrats are Republicans.
Well, that's a similar path that his father took. You remember his father, Birchby, he ran a failed campaign for president and then quit the Senate pretty early and then went off to be a rich lobbyist. So I think he's going father like son.
But it was wonderful because he was against the Vietnam War. And that he thought that he wouldn't get reelected.
Yeah, he was definitely a leading liberal lion, his father.
Out of curiosity, the metamorphosis of coverage of the White House over the years. Most of us who don't get to hang in your circles think that there was a time in which the president's personal life was off limits. We knew what was going on. I mean, we've heard all the stories about the few pictures of FDR in a wheelchair. We heard that many people in the press knew about Marilyn Monroe and JFK. There was a period, maybe it's because we didn't have 24-hour news channels. What changed that made everything that a president does come under a microscope for both of you?
The 1960s, we had a social revolution in this country. Before that, there was a golden rule where you did not touch on a public figure's personal life unless it affected his responsibilities and duties. In the 1960s changed that whole thing. Mainstream started following tabloids style and so forth because they would be accused of covering up. So everybody, there was no hold barred. I used to say, if you want to go into public life, you should decide at the age of 5 and live accordingly. because nothing is sacred anymore. All the skeletons and so forth, every reporter has to go after the real facts if they can.
Craig? This kind of goes to your question about the mushrooming of blogs, but one big change from those days is in those days, the media, if you could not confirm a rumor, you didn't report it. Nowadays, rumors are reported and then confirmed. In fact, you use the coverage of the rumor to try and confirm it. That doesn't mean rumors aren't true. I mean, look at what happened with the Edwards story. It took the National Enquirer. Everybody else stayed away from it because nobody could confirm it. National Enquirer gets it out. That one turned out to be true. One definition I heard of rumors once was that it's news you can remember.
By the way,
and I think they all get. Politicians now know they can cut you off at the pass by revealing everything in a book, in their memoirs. Yes, I took drugs once, or what did I do? All that goes. So they say, well, I already answered that question, so you can't get personal with them.
Right, asked and answered.
We've written a book all about it.
Being in the front row, being in the position you've been in, Helen, you still have to think carefully about your questions, because even though you shoot from the hip and have that reputation, you may not get the chance at the follow-up, and how you phrase your question has an infinite relationship to what you get back. I notice you punch. You don't give long setups. You punch. That's by design?
No, because I'm not on television. TV people, reporters, want to keep the camera on them for 4 hours. And they don't give a damn.
It's okay.
They really are trying to hold your attention. So they ask a simple question like, why did you do it, in 4 paragraphs?
Yeah.
You've really touched on, Mark, that was a great question, because you've touched on what I think's one of Helen's great genius in this work, is that boiling a question down to just what we call the nut graph in the business, and asking it in a way that anyone can understand and appreciate. Recently, in the exchange with Robert Gibbs over the public health option, and she was asking him, is the president going to abandon the public health option? And he says, Helen, you keep asking me that question, I always give you the same answer, which of course is always a non-answer. He says, why do you keep asking it? She said, because I want your conscience to bother you.
And it turned out that he was not for single payer, he's not for the government plan, even though those are the only things that can bring universal health care to our country, like Social Security. Medicare.
I want to share this with you. I once asked a member of Congress, I will not say who it was, and I asked, what is your media nightmare? And he said, so I gave it away, it's not a she, he said, to be locked up in a closet with Helen Thomas and Les Consolving.
When Al Newhart went to interview, what is this guy in Cuba? Castro. He said, said to Castro, now what is the difference between your democracy and our democracy? Castro said, I don't have to answer questions from Helen Thomas.
What a great line.
Yeah. That actually reminded me of when Marlon Fitzwater was Bush Sr.'s press secretary. He tells the story that he said almost every day that President Bush, the first Bush, would call him in and he says, what's Helen talking about today? Is Helen mad about anything? What's she thinking? And Marlon's point was that Bush realized Helen, and really our argument in the book is presidents should see the press corps as this in general, is it's a good gauge of the public mood, what people are interested in, what they're angry about, what they want to know, that use the press in that way, don't consider them enemies.
And the press is privileged because all of you would like to ask the president questions. We have this privilege, and we should not let the people down. These people who become president beg for your attention when they're running. Once they get into the Oval Office, the door closes, the Iron Curtain comes down.
Which president the most thought you were jackals? That the press corps, the White House press corps, all of them thought you were jackals? I don't think so. Do you think so?
Not in the beginning, in the campaigning when they're trying to woo you.
Yeah.
But once they get in, they think that all the government secrets are their private preserve, and it's not good for the American people to know.
I mean, look at President Obama, who really should have, I think could have very decent relations, keeps them at bay, and hasn't had a real press conference since July. Had one last week. Well, what did they do? They had it on the day of the snow when the federal government was closed. And half the press corps was in the briefing room. And I was kidding Helen on the way over here. I think somebody told him, he says, quick, get out there. Helen's not there.
When you cover, and I've been in that press room, it's a lot smaller than you think, when you're there. Are the seats, because somebody said, ask Helen, are the seats specially numbered? Do they have a little plate like on the TV show West Wing that's got your name on it where you're supposed to sit? Or for your paper, does your seat?
I'm not going to she's too modest, but let me tell you, most of them have the news organizations on the chairs. There's only one with a person's name on it, and that's hers.
Wow.
My ego is swelling.
There were a couple of times in the last few years where we thought you might disappear from sight, changing employers, changing wire services. What do you credit as what's given you the longevity to be successful?
Audacity. I think I have a sense of why give up?
Yeah.
You keep trying in life, I think. All of us. But no one should ever give up.
I get asked that question about her quite a bit, and I've figured out the answer. She has the most incredible work ethic I have ever seen in a person, even getting out on these book tours and everything else. But it goes back to one of the stories from the Kennedy years when she just camped outside his door when he was picking his cabinet at his Georgetown townhouse in a very harsh winter, so much so that he got worried about her and wanted to come inside and warm up. George Stephanopoulos, when he was press secretary to Clinton, famously closed the door to the press secretary offices, kept the reporters out. A lot of people remember that story. He wrote in his book, the reason he did that, he didn't want to let reporters back in his suite of offices, is that he was sick of coming to work every morning, and the first person he saw camped outside his door was Helen Thomas.
I think what keeps me going is my interest in the world, curiosity, and pure anger at injustice.
Two things for both of you. First, Helen, the Saturday Night Massacre during the Nixon administration. Our darkest time in your coverage of the White House?
That's what?
Darkest time in the Saturday Night Massacre for your coverage.
When Nixon finally resigned.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Definitely it was a terrible time. Real dark times are when we go to war. But There's no question that Watergate, to see a president go down in flames, it was unbelievable, and yet we all knew it was coming. For 6 months before President Nixon was forced to resign, it was darkness at noon in the press room. We were all waiting for the other shoe to fall, and we knew that his resignation was inevitable, inexorable, like a Greek tragedy.
And they locked you guys in the briefing room.
For his last trip around me.
His last walk around the South Lawn, they locked the reporters in the briefing room, wouldn't let them out, and they didn't know what was going on.
What are your feelings for both of you on when former presidents speak? And we're going to go to questions in just a couple of minutes here, just a few more. I used to believe in my heart of hearts that former presidents are best seen and not heard. Once a president leaves office, should they comment on public policy and criticize the next president, or do they send a confusing signal? Okay, go ahead. Go with that, Ellen.
They've been there. Why not? I mean, they can still contribute to the country by adding to the debate.
You don't think they send a confusing signal to the rest of the world?
What? So what?
I agree. I mean, I see your point, Mark, but I just think we cycle through presidents so quickly, even in two-termers, that I think that valuable experience they've had is worth being public, the public actually hearing at times. I actually advocate constitutionally they have the right to go on the Senate floor and make speeches. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Are you surprised that Dick Cheney has become the attack dog for the former administration and the former president doesn't address it, that Cheney is the one that's attacking Biden and Obama?
Well, I think something really fascinating happened with Cheney. If I can take everybody's minds back to January, the inauguration time, Republicans were afraid to attack Barack Obama as a person. I mean, they would attack the administration, but there was a lot of worry about attacking him as a person. The racial stuff was still a concern and so on. And it was when Dick Cheney came out in March, I believe, and said that he's making us less safe, and pretty harsh attack. He really was kind of the canary in the coal mine, for Republicans on that score, and that is, I think, what led to the chain of events that ended with and is still going on with, like, the Tea Party town halls and so on. I think he was I'm just looking at it from the political standpoint. I think he did the Republicans a favor in sort of opening that door, and I think that's led to a lot of Obama's problems and approval ratings.
Helen, your take.
I think he can't stand being out of power. This is a man who sent other people to war, a real hawk, and he got 5 deferments in Vietnam when we were perfectly healthy. So forth. I mean, everything he's done has been against people. He's an ultra hawk who never went to war.
I was somehow hoping Helen would come out of her shell just a little. I appreciate that. And
what have I got to lose?
God bless you. God bless you. This lady has great staying power. And for you, young man, you ran for office yourself.
I certainly did.
Folks may not know this, but Craig ran for office, in the early 80s?
I'm thinking it was 1982, and I think he's still in office, I ran against Daniel Webster. So I always thought if I'd changed my name to Abraham Lincoln, I would have won that race. But it was a formative experience for me because I learned not to do it again. Yeah. It was a lot of the pressures, but it's really helped me as a journalist because when I'm covering candidates, I have just a little bit of empathy for what it's like to be on the other side of those trenches. Because one thing that happened to me is I knocked on 3,000 doors in that district in Southwest Orange County. One day, this man, he said, "You Democrat or Republican?" I said, "Democrat," and he turned his sprinkler on me. So,
Helen, did you ever think of running for office?
Hell no.
All right.
Much better to sit here and criticize everybody.
Smart lady. We're going to take calls from our listeners at 239-0033. Mike Scudero is going to make his way through the audience. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment to either of our guests, we ask you to please be brief and make it directly to them. Mike will come and give you a mic check. So just raise your hand. Mike Scudero will make his way perhaps over to the left side. Let's go to Austin in Ormond Beach. Austin, if you're there, you're next on WNDB with both Helen and Craig. Hello.
Hey, Helen and Craig, how are you?
Hi.
Just one comment and then a quick question. Your comment, you said you were proud of the Liberals of bringing Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and just want to know if you were proud that those are both bankrupt organizations now and can't pay out, and they're in the red. And then number two, could you answer yes or no if you believe in socialism rather than capitalism?
I didn't hear
The second, well, the first part, and this is why I hate multiple part questions, has to do with the bailout that now we can't pay it back, and also do you believe that, so we're moving to socialism, and is that a good thing for both of you?
That's not socialism. If it
Is this country?
why didn't they say it in 1935 and so forth? Things have to be done. Nobody in this country should starve or lack for shelter. We are such a rich country. Why can't we help one another?
So you don't believe we're moving towards
Social
socialism?
Security was in trouble in 1982. Alan Greenspan, former Fed head, was put in charge of a commission to look into the problems. What the commission did in the end, the panel did, was to raise the taxes for Social Security. There is no reason why we cannot help each other.
I think socialism is about government control of the economy, ownership of companies, and so on. In that sense, the GM takeover is a little bit of a step in that direction if it's permanent, which it's not supposed to be. But when the government pays for health care, that's not socialism to me. Otherwise, veterans health care benefits is socialism. I don't think people want to get rid of that, or Medicare. If that's your definition of socialism, if it's that broad, then yes, I think we are moving toward that, and maybe we should, but I don't think that's the right definition.
But do we want the government?
Banks are not allowed to fail, but people are allowed to fail. Why?
Okay. Do we want the government owning automobile companies and things like that?
They're not owning. You're just helping to bail them out.
I mean, if it's a temporary bailout, I got no problem with it. But I mean, permanent, ownership and manufacture. I don't want the president to become car dealer in chief.
And he doesn't want it to either.
And he doesn't want it. Yeah.
We are mixing the current issues with the book, Listen Up, Mr. President, everything you always wanted your president to know and do. Let's go in the audience now. Mike Scudero with a question from our audience.
And Mark, you heard them mention earlier, what can the media do to be more aggressive? Well, that's our first question tonight. It comes from Trish.
Hi, you mentioned that the press are currently acting a little cowardly. What can we do as citizens to demand that they serve as the watchdogs they're supposed to be?
What can we do what can citizens do to make reporters tougher on those they cover?
You can do exactly what you're doing, which is to taunt us every day and tell us that we're not doing the job. We let the country down in the run-up to the war in Iraq. No question about it.
The press let the American people down?
And I think we have to put reporters in shame when they don't ask the questions that should be asked.
And also, don't yell at us when we're tough on them and say we're rude, because you got to understand, it's hard to get information out of the government, and sometimes you have to ask questions that seem a little bit rude.
And the president is no different from any of us, as far as I'm concerned. You have to worship the office, and we're so glad it lasted more than 200 years. But the point is, these are human beings, and they should relate to the American people.
Well, the phone number here is 239-0033. AT&T star 1150. We'll mix calls from our radio audience and questions from the audience. Once again, here's Mike.
And Mark, we have something we see on C-SPAN every now and again that intrigues many of our political insiders, and that's the focus of our next question tonight from Bardia.
Hi, thank you again for being here tonight. Just very quickly, I've always wanted to go into politics, I think even when I was 5. Before you all start booing, I want to do what's right, and I would never consider leaving my morals. But I found that in politics, if you are willing to have integrity and to stick to your morals, there are people that the other side will back, that people that are not at those. So I've just lost faith in politics. But something that you have always been trying to get the tough answers from the questions. Do you think that what they do in England with the Prime Minister's questions, where the other party especially takes the opportunity to get direct questions from the Prime Minister, would that benefit our society?
It's great theater.
We had question time like the British do for presidents, I'd love it.
Anybody's ever seen that on
Early enough.
C-SPAN.
Early enough. I mean, you know, two quick points. Well, one is I happened to get a tour of the Parliament one time from a member of the House of Lords, and I learned something very interesting about question time between the two chambers of the House of Lords and the Parliament. Is they have a bar, and I saw that and I thought, well, so they're all drinking, and this guy said, yeah, they're usually half drunk. So that's one reason those question time is so exciting.
I thought that's what happens on Air Force One. You know, that's when you really get into it. Let's go back in the audience once again now, and Mike joins us.
And Mark, we've got a former colleague of Helen and Craig's here with our next question.
First of all, it's such an honor to have you. My dad came to Washington, D.C. In the Second World War, gave up a commission, was one of the undersecretaries of agriculture, and when they brought them there for $1 a year men, we were married in Walter Reed Chapel. I've been watching you right there in the front row most of the time, and fast forward, I had the wonderful opportunity in Fairfield County, Connecticut, to cover education and politics. I say this very humbly. I was a stringer for the New York Times and Christian Science Monitor. I want to just thank you for saying you can't break a story and ruin people's lives. I thank you both, but especially you, Helen. I've been watching you for years.
That's very kind.
Thank you.
That's very kind of you.
Our phone number is 239-0033, AT&T, star 1150. Go ahead, Helen.
I want to say that when I was asked what motivated me, I suddenly remembered my old answer, which is outrage.
Can people, do you feel that as a reporter and a columnist, a person who deals now in opinion, that you're under the microscope as well as the politicians that you write about?
Sure. Absolutely. I think, you know, like who in the hell am I to criticize and so forth?
Have you had one of those instances?
And they have the right to say that, too.
You're in the grocery store and you're going through the frozen food section and suddenly, why did you write that? Does that happen?
Sure. Oh, well, during the Nixon era, when they really created an atmosphere against the press, people would come by and spit on us.
Really? Have you ever been spit on, sir?
I haven't been spit on. I did have blood thrown on me one time from pro-life demonstrators, but I got my newspaper to pay for the dry cleaning. So,
how fortuitous! Let's go back in the audience at 239-0033. We're talking to Helen Thomas, Craig Crawford. Mike, now your question from the audience.
And Mark, our next question tonight comes from Sylvia with a question on the woman who almost became our next president.
Yes, thank you. I'm so pleased to have you both here, particularly Helen Thomas. I've watched you, and I'm so proud to have you as a fellow female person who stands up for your rights and what you believe. But my question is, initially I really was hoping, excuse me, Hillary Clinton would become our next president. I felt she had the intelligence, and perhaps people might question her integrity, but I thought she would do a lot. And then I did end up voting for Barack Obama. But I wanted to get your viewpoint on her as First Lady and now her as Secretary of State.
I was in favor of Hillary because I wanted to see a woman, really, because I thought a woman certainly is capable and so forth. It was not a hard choice for me because I thought Obama had time. He's in his 40s and so forth. But it was time for us to have a woman, and I was very disappointed. I think that she certainly is very capable, but they have sliced off so much of her role as Secretary of State now. I mean, they have different people running different parts of the world, like Holbrooke has Afghanistan, and George Mitchell has the Middle East, and so forth. So it seems to me that she's become almost just a fixture instead of really truly delivering the word. I don't think Mrs. Roosevelt would have allowed that, and so forth.
Helen, let me follow up on that. Do you think that President Obama just parked Hillary at state just to get her out of the way?
No, I don't think that. I think he truly felt that she was qualified in every way. But I do think that men have a way of taking over especially they think that foreign policy is their private preserve. And I don't think that women are treated as well, and of course in different parts of the world, I mean, women don't have the same appreciation, but I do think that she's too much of a hawk. And that's what I really am surprised at her. A woman should be the peacemaker or seek peace. I haven't heard the word peace in 20 years at the White House. It's out of the question. I wrote a lead the other day on a column that I'm sure everybody hated. I said President Obama does have a foreign policy, period. It's called war. I mean, what is this? Why are we going to war every 5 minutes? We shouldn't be killing people and shouldn't be dying. If religion is one thing, I mean, you could go to war with everybody. You just got to find the road to peace some way. I mean, these young people going in because they have no jobs. The Pentagon's so happy the recruitment is high because the people can't find jobs. What do? You have to give your life?
Well, let me ask you to follow up on this.
I think we should have a real explanation of why we're there.
Why? I'll accept that argument. Let me ask you, what did we ever do to Hugo Chavez that makes him hate us so much?
We've tried to cut him off at the pass. We tried to depose him, and it was failed. We tried a coup d'etat against him, and he gets more and more dictatorial and liberal because he's threatened. We're doing the same thing to Iran. If every country that has major weapons is threatening you every day, what would you do as a leader of the country? You try to build a weapon, right?
Were we threatening Venezuela with nuclear weapons?
Not with nuclear weapons, but certainly getting him out of the office. We didn't like his socialistic views.
Hillary Clinton, who you just spoke of, said that Iran will become a military dictatorship. Is she right?
Sure. If you're threatened every day, as Iran is, what would you do? You'd arm yourself, or you give the revolutionary types
those are not fighter jets, by the way.
A real argument for defending the country. They'll call themselves patriots.
Okay.
Because they are threatened every day.
Additional viewpoint, Craig?
Well, I was thinking about Hillary and this juncture right now in Iran because I think this is an opportunity for her that to reassert herself, and I agree with Helen that she has been sort of clipped off at the edges, and she seems to have been given this portfolio to sort of carry the ball forward. She was over in the region last week for the anniversary of the Islamic Revolution and the announcement of their nuclear testing, and so I think this is going to be interesting to watch her deal with it and see. And if it doesn't work out for her, if she doesn't really sort of resurge in the administration, I think she won't stay on by her own choice as Secretary of State in the second term. And if Obama gets worse and people and Democrats start getting grumbly, I don't really rule out the Hillary Clinton running for president again.
See, that's significant. This came up on the talk show this afternoon where someone suggested if his numbers tank enough, she would take him on. You think it's possible?
I think a lot more's got to happen that could happen, but not right now. But I can see that path.
Helen, could you see Hillary taking on Barack?
No.
Let's go to the audience now. Once again, here's Mike. And Mark, a number of us here know that Helen has made history in a number of ways throughout her career, and with a question on part of that, our next question comes from Paula.
Hi, thank you. What was it like at the National Press Club before 1971 for women?
Women. When I first went to Washington in summer of '42, we could not, and when I started covering the White House and started covering major departments, we could not belong to the National Press Club because we were women. That was the simple rule. So women reporters formed their own press club, but we didn't have the facilities or anything else, and it was sheer discrimination. when Nikita Khrushchev was coming to town, and it was opening a new historic era in relations between the U.S. and Soviet Union, Khrushchev was invited to come to Washington, and by Eisenhower, and we all, of course, any head of state coming to Washington made his one appearance before the press at the National Press Club, where we couldn't go. Well, this is the point where we decided to fight. We said, no, it's impossible. A head of state coming to this country, we cover these State Department, White House, and so forth, with you, side by side, toe to toe, and we can't go cover Nikita Khrushchev. Well, we really badgered the White House, and it worked out that they forced National Press Club to allow 30 women, news women, to attend the one luncheon where Khrushchev was going to speak. It was in 1959. I was at the head table because I represented the Women's Press Club and so forth. And that's when Khrushchev said, we will bury you. But we buried them, of course. But at the same time, that was 1959. We did not get into the National Press Club till 1972.
Wow. Let's go back in the audience. Back in the audience, once again, here's Mike.
And Mark, with a question on an important court ruling that was handed down recently, we go to Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for coming this evening. As a communications major, I was really disturbed to find out a couple weeks ago that the Supreme Court passed a ruling allowing corporations to donate a limited amount of money to political campaigns. How do you think this is going to affect our political elections in the upcoming years?
That's me. I mean, I think it's the biggest problem in our politics that we cannot control the flow of money into campaigns, and we'll never be able to control it with a Supreme Court that has that attitude. I understand the argument that it's a First Amendment right, and that gives me difficulty because I consider myself kind of an absolutist on the First Amendment, but at some point there's got to be some give. I mean, there's always give and take in constitutional principles, and I just think the flow of money into campaigns is never going to stop without a change in those kinds of rulings. So it leaves me very pessimistic, and this young gentleman here who said he's disillusioned by politics, I think that's one reason why, because people who are rooted in principle and want to really serve the public and be public servants are kind of rooted out by this system, and so I can't bring you much optimism about that changing, I'm afraid, because of that kind of ruling.
Precious minutes left, and I know many of you, the largest crowd we've had in the series to date, want to get your book signed, so we're going to go to that signing in moments. Let's take another question from our radio audience listening in Ormond Beach. Claudia, your question now for Helen and Craig. Hello.
Hi, I'd like to welcome both Helen and Chris to Daytona Beach, and my question is for Helen. Helen, most of your years you have steeled yourself in politics. Do you allow yourself a hobby?
Do you have a hobby, Helen?
No. My hobby, I love to read newspapers mostly. Unfortunately, I don't read books much time. I shouldn't say that when I'm trying to sell one, but actually, you don't have them. You always have to try to feel that you're keeping up. So I get the Washington Post, open the door in the morning, and get the Post and New York Times. And by the time you can get through through the headlines,
are off, the cameras are off.
She likes to talk about politics. Looks like what she's been saying right here is what she likes to do in the car ride over and the car ride back.
And scotch. Gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic.
We talk politics all. That's how we came to write the book, is we got to be friends at a restaurant in Washington that we went to a lot, and a lot of other friends, and we talk politics socially all the time, and that's what led to deciding, well, why don't we just put some of these conversations in a book?
It's a way of life in Washington.
By the way, someone told me that the National Press Corps has dwindled greatly under this economy. Is that true? The offices in Washington, has it changed much? Or
newspapers are dying.
Yeah.
They're closing the bureaus. It's I think it's a crime, because I could never live without a newspaper.
I mean, they call this a recession, but it's been a full-on depression for the newspaper industry.
Let's go to the audience for one more question. Once again, here's Mike.
Mark, since we are at a college full of students, probably appropriate that our last question tonight comes from Michael.
Hi, Helen. I want to thank you for coming to Embry-Riddle again. And so my question is actually about my generation. I grew up, through the 90s and the 2000s, and the very first political thing I remember was 9/11. We grew up, my generation, with war constantly, and I think a lot of us are disheartened by that. And we're not sure what to do exactly. So I was wondering, what's something with your experience and advice could you impart on my generation?
Keep asking questions. Ask why. I remember I spoke right after the Vietnam War at West Point, and to the cadets, and I told them, I said, look, you ought to know why you're going to war, why you're being asked to kill people, and why you're being asked to die. I mean, you have to have a good reason. There is such a thing as they call my country. May she always be right, but my country right or wrong. But I think we have to go further than that. And I think that young people should be probing as to real reasons. Read history, read the news stories. I mean, gain some sort of confidence in yourself. There are reasons to go to war. There are. Real tyranny and so forth. Occupation, definitely. No country wants to be under the rule of another country. But there are also reasons not to go to war. And when the government really falsifies the reasons, we're all in trouble. So I say study history, read newspapers, stay up to date with what's going on in the world, and you can make a contribution.
The book is called Listen Up, Mr. President, Everything You Always Wanted Your President to Know and Do. Helen Thomas, Craig Crawford, our guests today at the President's Series.
Thank you. Thank you.
Program note.